Lawmakers from both sides of the aisles in dozens of states have begun implementing cost-effective reforms that reduce recidivism, improve outcomes, and make our country a safer place. Today, you'll hear from a wide variety of folks about data-driven criminal justice reforms that legislators can use to implement policy solutions that address collateral consequences, reentry, and the impact of incarceration on families and children. Let me introduce to you Jenna Moll is an attorney with broad experience in successful state policy initiatives and strategy. Currently, Jenna is the policy director for U.S. Justice Action Network. Most recently, Jenna worked with the Pew Charitable Trust, leading comprehensive juvenile justice policy initiatives, and previously served the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, researching and educating policymakers, folks like us, on a variety of policy initiatives across the country. In addition, Jenna was a legislative aide in the Wisconsin legislature, where she dealt with various policy issues, media affairs, and constituent outreach. Please join me with a warm welcome for Jenna Moll, who's going to educate us on some of the latest and greatest reforms in the criminal justice system.
All right, good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be with you this morning, and I'm so excited to be talking about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart and so important to so many of the people in this room. We have a fantastic lineup for you with legislators who work on these issues and stakeholders who have dealt with these issues for years and years and years, so a lot of good information. But before we dig in, I did want to kind of just set the tone a little bit. And I know it's very early on a Sunday morning, and I'm going to throw some stats at you, but I apologize, just four. Just four numbers is all I'm going to ask you to remember this morning. The first one is 2.3. On any given day across the United States, there are 2.3 million people behind bars in either prison or jail. It's a huge number. It's one that's been growing over the last few decades. We surpass every other industrialized country in this number. We're really good at locking people. We've got that down pat. We figured that out. The second number that I have for you is 80 billion. $80 billion is how much taxpayers spend every single year to maintain those prisons and jails. That doesn't even count the hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend on our court system, and our law enforcement, and our criminal justice agencies. The taxpayer investment is astronomical in this. And that number pales, though, when you consider it in the context of the third number for you, and that's 2/3. 2/3 of the people that exit prison every single year are going to recidivate. Our system is failing us with public safety return. We're not getting what we're paying for. Think about it. I mean, your legislators, you appropriate budgets. If any other agency came to you asking for as much money as the corrections agency does, and yet only succeeded 1 out of 3 times they tried to do something, you'd put your foot down. You'd change the way that you were doing your policy. You would revisit the entire system. And the final number that I have is 3 million. There are 3 million children who have a parent or 2 parents behind bars. The impact on our families and our communities is astounding. It's not just money, it's not just the taxpayer costs, it's our families and our communities and our country and what these children are going to grow up with. As legislators, one of the most important things that you do is work to maintain healthy communities, strong families, and a good environment for children to grow up in. And the criminal justice system actually is a good way to strengthen families. It's a good way to turn things around if we do it right. Now that's a stark problem statement. It's serious stuff for a Sunday morning. At least I'm not telling y'all not to eat red meat, so I feel like I'm in a better place. It's a good thing. I have better news, though. The good news is, even with that horrible problem statement that we have the solutions. We have the answers. We know how to fix this, and we know how to turn this around. And there's 2 reasons that we know that. One are the states. The states have been working on this issue for years and years and years. They have been working to turn their systems around, to really create a better criminal justice system. And many of those states are represented here in this room. We've got Oregon, and Michigan, and Illinois, Georgia, Alaska, Hawaii. If you see legislators from one of those states, stop them and ask them what they're doing in the correctional system and what's working, how they've made criminal justice system work better in their state for their taxpayers and for their families. They've invested in proven alternatives, and they've moved the criminal justice system from being one-size-fits-all to being far more effective. In fact, 32 states in the last few years have been able to cut both imprisonment rates and crime rates at the same time. That's incredible, and that's the first step towards a better criminal justice system that protects public safety and reduces taxpayer costs. The second reason that we know that there's a better way to do things is my organization, the U.S. Justice Action Network. So if I told you there was a policy out there that President Barack Obama, the NAACP, Speaker John Boehner, and Charles Koch and the Koch Institute all agreed on completely, would you believe me? Would you put it out there? If I told you there was a policy that the ACLU and Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, would stand on a stage just like this one and say, we agree 100%, we believe in this policy and we'll fight to make it happen, would you believe me? That's what we have with these criminal justice reform alternatives that our panel is going to talk about this morning. We have policies that the left and the right together agree and will support you as you try to get these done in these states, and they'll work together to make this work. It's really extraordinary. My organization, the U.S. Justice Action Network, on the left, we have the ACLU, we have the Center for American Progress, we have Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, the NAACP. On the right, we have Americans for Tax Reform, Faith and Freedom, Freedom Works, and Right on Crime. The strongest organizations from both the left and the right that work on these issues have come together as a coalition and said, we're going to fix this system for good. I think that's a really exciting time in public policy when we finally have an answer that the left and the right agree on, and I think it's extraordinary. And if your state hasn't already taken advantage of these policies, I encourage you to do so today. Now is the time. And with that, I am so excited to bring up our first speaker. She is just an incredible human being, someone that I've become very lucky to get to know over the last few days. And she has very ably, I should say, represented the citizens of Tulsa right here in the great state of Oklahoma, which is very exciting. Representative Kim Peterson. She is, I should say, in her time in the legislature since 2004, she is the first female majority floor leader in Oklahoma's history, which I think is incredibly exciting. Yes. She's also served as majority whip. She's served on the task force to stop sexual violence. She's served on the Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women. She has gone above and beyond for the citizens of Oklahoma. And this is an issue that she's begun to work on, and she's really led her state towards a better criminal justice system already. And she's going to talk to you all about that. Please welcome Representative Peterson to the stage.
Thank you all for being here so early in the morning to hear such a heavy topic, but such an important topic for our whole country. I was the author this year of the Justice Safety Valve, which many of you in this room, probably about 17 or 18 states have passed similar legislation. But I'm going to give you a little background of how we got to even running this bill, because I want to encourage you, if you're thinking about doing some criminal justice reform, it's more than likely not going to happen in one session, possibly, depending on your state. It's going to take a little time and effort, but I want to encourage you in that, and I'll give you the little background of where we started in Oklahoma. Our prison population in Oklahoma since 1990 has doubled, but our crime rate only went down 14.3%. Violent crime was higher in our state than the national average, and the length of time that was served in Oklahoma grew by 83% in the last 20 years, the third highest in the nation. During this time, the national average had dropped 47% in their crime rate, and our incarceration rate for men was the fourth highest, and we were #1 in women incarceration. Statistics we were not proud of. So in the 1980s and the 90s, we were all tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key. That was kind of the mentality in our state, and I think in the nation too. And so there was a real push for 3 strikes and you're out, 85% crimes, and we felt like we were really doing great for public safety in our state. Well, the statistics didn't prove out, so it was obvious that we were not getting a positive return on our investment. And I think that's a key thing. We have to reverse a trend that's been going on for 20 years, and a mindset in the public too, because they don't understand this issue and how it affects all aspects of life in your state. And I think, Jenna, I thank you for bringing up those important points. I was not experiencing this issue at all, I must say. I was involved with DHS issues, some domestic violence things, but as far as our criminal justice system, I was not really involved in that until this year. Our Speaker of the House created a new committee called Criminal Justice and Corrections Committee, and he appointed me chair. I had previously been floor leader, and he says, you know, you were here during a lot of these times, because I'm the most senior member now in the House. You understand where we were and how far we've come, so he put me in that position. And then I was asked to run the bill that was the Justice Safety Valve bill that had been vetted by the ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, endorsed by the ACLU, all these different groups that Jenna referenced. I never would have believed that the right and the left would come together on an issue like this, but it speaks to the importance of this issue. When you can get both sides to agree on changing something like this important, you know you're onto something. So I want to encourage you in that. In our state, we have over 100 mandatory minimums. And in Oklahoma, our prisons are at 118% of capacity. We need to do something different. And we have to change our mindset of tough on crime to smart on crime. Tough on crime doesn't do it. Being smart on crime will impact our state. So I was involved in DHS work, and I was seeing all these children that were, their mothers and their fathers were in prison. So the impact on your social services or human services in the state is tremendous. So when you can address some of the corrections reforms, you're going to affect families. You're going to bring people and families together. A little more background on our state to understand where we are, and I'll explain the bill that was passed this last year. We had done many interim studies, incarcerated women. We knew we were top in the world in incarcerating women and children affected. So we kept doing all these studies, but we didn't do any legislation until really 2011, 2012, when then Speaker of the House, Chris Steele, authored the Justice Reinvestment Act. And that was talking about real reform, sentencing reform, probation, really following these inmates once they got out to help them get jobs and different programs. And that was a fight to get all of that passed back in 2011 and 12, because people thought that's going to be soft on crime. We're letting these guys out, you know, without, you know, putting them in community service programs. And so Speaker Steele had to really fight at that time to get that initiative passed. And then it wasn't properly funded. So we were still we passed this good bill, but it wasn't properly funded. So it was still, we're kind of still, you know, trudging up this mountain, trying to get, you know, significant reform passed. So that, finally people were starting to get educated. There were op-ed pieces and business leaders that were seeing, wait a second, we want more money going to education. We want more money, you know, for economic development and things, and this is the sucking hole of corrections that is taking all of our money, and what are we getting back for it? The recidivism rate, as Jenna referenced, is extremely high. So obviously we were just in a revolving door situation of, you know, paying for these prisoners just to become better prisoners in our correction system. And I've said publicly that we really need to rename our correction system and call it Department of Prisons and not Corrections, because we weren't correcting anybody. We were just bringing them back into the system. So I think that bill really helped launch a statewide look by business leaders, and the education people too were starting to look at it saying, yeah, you know, we need more money for education, and we want to help in this area too. So it was kind of a consensus, I think, in the groundswell of individuals around our state that were saying, we get this now. We're starting to understand that this is a real problem. I come from a very Republican, conservative district, and I was amazed. I was invited to speak at different Tea Party groups about this bill. They were for it. And then you have, like I said, the ACLU for it. So I was like, wow, this is an amazing experience for me. It was really, truly wonderful. I was asked to run this justice safety valve bill, and basically what this does, it gives judges a second look at our mandatory minimums. It ensures that lengthy sentences and prison beds are reserved for the most dangerous criminals and not those that we're just mad at. It allows us to focus our resources on those violent offenses. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of a potential person that would be eligible under my justice safety valve bill. And I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess up the charges here. Okay, let's say a 50-year-old man addicted to opiate pain prescription pills is caught stealing a circular saw or a cordless drill from someone's garage so he can pawn that off to buy more pills. If the home was occupied and the garage was attached, he can be charged with first-degree burglary. Let's say over the 10 years he has ended up being convicted twice of drug possession for having a couple of Oxycontin pills. The mandatory minimum on burglary is 1 to 7 years. But with Oklahoma's enhancement law for prior offenses, that's tripled to mandatory minimum of 21 years in prison at 85% for stealing the power tool. The state would spend conservatively $175,000 or more to incarcerate a nonviolent offender who took an $80 power tool because of his addiction. That's a little snapshot of possibly a judge looking at that saying, do we want to spend to incarcerate this individual for 21 years? But our mandatory minimums would require that that judge follow that law. This bill has the flexibility to modify that sentence in unusual cases where the mandatory minimum sentence is ill-fitting and does not contribute to a lack of public safety. It's smart on crime. It creates a pressure valve for the Department of Corrections so that if they don't have to dedicate those expensive beds to nonviolent offenders. It will reduce the number of nonviolent offenders, I think especially women, who are incarcerated in our state at a higher rate than any other. Because the women oftentimes are in there for drug and alcohol charges, or because they were with a boyfriend and they happened to hand the drug to somebody else that happened to be an undercover cop, so now she is trafficking the drugs. And we're putting these people away for an inordinate amount of time that maybe could be helped with their addiction. In all the 17 states that cut their imprisonment rates over the past decade, their crime rate has declined. This bill does not go into effect until November 1st, so I do not have any real data on what impact this will have, but I do believe it's a culture change in the way we're thinking about this bill. The biggest opposition I had was from the prosecutors, because right now the prosecutors set the tone for the plea, and the judges have to follow suit at the end of the case. So this is just giving the judges a second look at the end to say, you know what, I don't think this woman deserves 21 years because she got caught in this web of drugs and a bad situation with a boyfriend. And she has 2 kids, by the way, that's going to go maybe in foster care, and the state's going to take care of that. How do we address her addiction? How can she get better help with her recovery so she doesn't reoffend? By putting her in prison is not going to solve the problem. And tomorrow morning, I just want to encourage you so much to attend a roundtable by a group in Tulsa called Women in Recovery. It was basically funded by the George Kaiser Family Foundation, and we also, they're getting other grants and so forth. But it's a phenomenal program addressed to women that are caught in this drug addiction, and it's an intensive alternative to incarceration. and it's marvelous. I just encourage you, if you're interested in this issue at all, to please attend that roundtable. You will be encouraged and inspired. In fact, Women in Recovery, because Speaker Steele had gone to visit them and hear their stories, that's why he ran the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, because he was so impressed. He goes, we can do better. This program really works, and alternative to incarceration really, really works with people with addictions. And what's really been encouraging in the last just few months, even since we passed the Justice Safety Valve bill, and I can get more specifics if you in the Q&A in regards to that, but I kind of want to just set the tone of the culture here, because it's been 5 years since we really started initiating these kinds of reforms, and it takes that long sometimes, because you have to convince, especially your newer members, your freshman members, they're afraid to be called soft on crime. They have to face re-election, and they're nervous. They think, oh, they're going to think if we do anything to tweak our corrections, we're going to be soft on crime, and I'm not going to get re-elected. So that's why it's really important to get all the different stakeholders, op-ed pieces. We handed out cards like this at the Capitol with a, just hand out to people, so we really educated them all the time through the session. It kind of bugged them, actually, probably a lot. We had different groups coming up talking about the issue. And the one really neat thing was our Governor Mary Fallon, who had done her own study on women incarceration a number of years ago when she was in the legislature and lieutenant governor before becoming governor. She is really, this is a main issue to her right now, is corrections reform, and I'm so proud of her leadership in this, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take, if you have a governor that's not going to sign anything or not think that this is important, you just need to get as many stakeholders involved that you possibly can. And she has really taken the lead. In fact, she was in a dinner in Tulsa, and it was nothing to do with issues or anything, but she mentioned the corrections reform, because it was in her state of the state. So she has been leading this from her bully pulpit. But in addition to that, I have to say, right now during the interim, we don't go back into session until February, she has created steering committees, justice reform steering committees. And there's a sentencing committee, and it's looking at 3 ways that possibly we can reduce some maybe felonies to misdemeanors, looking at all of those. There's a programs and reentry subcommittee, and what key parts in the incarceration process, like pre-incarceration, alternative programming, all these things they're looking at in these few months. And then policy subcommittee, they're looking at that, and treatment. And there's many treatments out there. I just was introduced to a new treatment program in Tulsa this last week that's phenomenal, using Vivitrol as a possible, I don't know if you've heard of that. So we're looking at all aspects to decrease this incarceration rate. And I'm looking forward to those recommendations from her. So I just want to, I guess, encourage you in this, that it's a long fight at times, it's a tough fight, but to know that we have so many people helping you that believe that this is the right time. It's the right time to be right on crime and to be smart on crime. And I just want to encourage you in that, and I'd be happy to answer questions at the end. Is that right? Okay, thank you.
That was fantastic, thank you. And thank you for your leadership here in Oklahoma on these issues. I gotta say, guys, this justice safety valve is such a fantastic thing for any criminal justice system, no matter if it has significant reforms or if you're just getting started. It's an essential component. The federal government is now following Oklahoma's lead and trying to pass an additional safety valve in their correction system as well. So I would encourage you all to ensure that's part of your correctional system, and if not, she's got model language for you to get that into law. Our next speaker is another just tireless advocate for her constituents and for her state, and we're just so thrilled to have her with us. Representative Mia Jones from Florida represents the Jacksonville area. She was first elected in 2008. She serves on the Health and Human Services Committee, and the work that she's done and the groups that you're involved with are just extraordinary. The National Order of Women Legislators, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, the Healthy Start Coalition, just to name a few. You worked on legislation on health care, on civil rights, housing, criminal justice, criminal records, juvenile justice. You worked so hard to make this system work better for Florida, and we're so honored to have you with us. Please welcome Representative Mia Jones to the stage.
Good morning.
Good morning.
When I got the call to participate on today's panel, I said, you sure you don't want me to speak on healthcare? Because that's really where I focus a lot of my time. But I have the pleasure, I will say, to represent a community that I was born and raised in. For many of you, you understand that in every city, there are two sides. And so, being an African-American woman and being an African-American legislator, my district is predominantly African-American. Except when they redrew the lines and they try to do some special things, and now they don't understand why the other folks love me too. But it's all about once you're elected, you represent everything. And so, one of the things that I began to recognize, and oftentimes you don't know why things happen. And I can remember as a young person, my dad was the executive director of the YMCA. And back then, he did that for 32 years, and back then they would contact him and say, we have some young men who need to do some community service hours. And can they come there to do community service hours? Well, they were going to put them into a difficult situation because my dad was going to lecture them. He was going to be a part of their life well after their time was over. And he was going to become a part of their family, which resulted in our family becoming a part of their family. And so when I became a legislator, I started to think back on what he would say to them, and that you have to look at what you did, pay your penance, and then move forward. Well, in those days, we allowed them to move forward. And we just heard our speaker talk about being hard on crime. And so those things that at one time were minor, a little fight on the schoolyard, or you push someone, didn't result in you having a criminal record. And everyone feeling that, we needed to throw the book at you. And so when you look at that and you say, we're going to try to turn the clock back, you have to put some things in place, but you have to recognize what you've already done. And so thanks to the Southern Poverty Leadership Conference, they have been amazing in helping me to craft legislation and to fight for those things that I felt were definitely important to making sure that our young people have the opportunity to start life over. And so this past year, one of the bills that was really important to me was House Bill 205. Well, for those in the minority, you know that your bills don't often get heard. And I've learned that through this process, you have to make friends. And so also through this process, sometimes you have to be a little strategic. And in being strategic, you have to make sure that your language is included in multiple places, in multiple bills, and that there are other people who believe in what you're talking about. And so I went to the chairman of the committee and I said, I really want this bill heard. And he said, Mia, don't worry about it. I'm going to put it into a committee bill. Well, committee bills pass, except for when you're in Florida and we decide to close up shop early. And so this year, year we were not able to pass the bill, but what the bill would have done was it would have allowed for young people who had gotten in trouble 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age, and they served their time, whatever their sentence was, and they're back in our communities. They would then be given the opportunity that at age 18 for their record to be expunged. We know that at 18, if you finish high school and you want to go to college, they look at that. They look at your record. If you want to go into the military, they look at your record. If you want to get a job, they're going to look at your record. And so recognizing that, I said, if we close the door on them going to school, on them getting a job, or them going into the military, what do we expect other than for them to reoffend? And so we began to work on that, because in Florida at 21 you could request for your record to be expunged in 5 years. Yeah. At 21, you could request for your record to be expunged in 5 more years. So at 26, that's a long time to have doors closed on you. And so when I went to the chairman and I said, I need to do this, and I want to recognize one of my colleagues, Representative Sharon Pritchard, who served on that committee, and she was my voice with the chairman and the vice chair and the folks on the committee. I want to thank you, because she's the one who had the expertise in the area. And so she was sitting there at the table. And we said, when they said no to an automatic at 18, she said, well, there's a guy down in South Florida who's working on this. I said, yeah, I talked to him on the phone. She said, I got his number here. And we got on the phone with him, and we came up with a solution that if it wasn't immediately expunged at 18, that what we would do is to make sure that everything was in line for it to be sealed at 18 and then expunged at 21. But now recognize that we have created, as government officials, a mass bureaucracy. So for everything that we've done, we said, okay, you got to go and fill out an application. And then when you fill out the application, your application has to be evaluated. And then after your application is evaluated, you've got to go through a hearing. And then after you go through this hearing, then a group of people will decide whether or not they're going to approve your request. And what I'm saying is, that's too much. The courts heard the case, they sentenced them, they served their time, they came out, and we're saying that at 18, if they haven't gotten in trouble, give them a chance to start over and give our communities an opportunity to rebuild. And they can rebuild when our youth have an opportunity to grow and to prosper. And so we will be working on that again this year. The chairman has committed to that. We will get the bill passed, and this is my last session, so I'll be fighting very hard to do that. But in the midst of that, a few years ago, I had a judge to come to me after I had been receiving a number of calls in my community of people who had suspended licenses. Now we know for many jobs they require you to have a driver's license. Kind of basic. Have a driver's license, they have your information, whatever. You might have to drive for the job, you may not. But they require you to have a driver's license. And as legislators, over time, we've used the driver's license as a tool to penalize. So if you don't pay your child support, we take your license away. All right? If you drive on a suspended license and you get 5 driving on a suspended license, you get a felony on your record and become a habitual traffic offender. Well, we know felonies will end your life, and it will negatively impact your family for generations to come. And so what I did was I said to the judge, now this is not my area, I don't understand it, I just know that I'm getting a lot of phone calls, can you write the legislation? And he said, yes ma'am, I'll write it. And he wrote it, and I took it to Tallahassee, and we implemented it, and for once, we got it passed in one session. And in passing it in that one session, it was during the recession. We had just 2 years before that increased traffic fines, and we said, you know, what can we do? And so not only did we put in place an opportunity for people to pay their tickets in partial payments, but we also put in place that you could have the habitual traffic offender designation removed from your record if you did everything that you were required to do, and that was signed off on. And so we have to allow people to, again, open doors of opportunity. When I've had people to come to me and say, because of that bill and because of that law being implemented, I was able to get a promotion on my job. I am able to not have my parents drive me to work. And I'm able to go after a better job. That's when I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. We've talked about, over the years, zero tolerance policies, and in Florida we finally came around to understanding that that may not be the right answer. And so we've talked about civil citations and the importance of making sure that when something happens that you give people who understand what's going on the ability to make a decision as to whether or not you want a criminal charge filed or you want to give them a civil citation. And so I don't see Representative Gwen Clark-Reed, but I want to give her a shout out because for a number of years she worked on the civil citations bill in Florida and was determined that we would allow for our communities, with the help of our school boards and our sheriff's department, to be able to make the right decision within each case. And so we have civil citations, and we are working to strengthen those opportunities for our young people, again, to have a second chance. We know that we were young once. And in being young, we still are, Sharon? In being young, we make some decisions that are not always in our best interest. And when we make those decisions, we may look back 10, 20, 30 years and say, what was I thinking? But we were blessed to be covered and not to have to live with it for the rest of our life. And so what I'm saying to each one of you, that as you go back to your legislative bodies, think about that. Think about making sure that we open doors of opportunity and not close the future for families. Think about creating opportunities for your young people in your community and even for the adults in your community to make a mistake, pay their time, and then come back and be productive citizens within your community. It can be done. But the way it happens is that we make sure that we erase some of the things that we put in place that were great sound bites for campaign, and that we do what we would know we would want to happen for our families. And I'll close with this. One of my colleagues was chairing a criminal justice, the juvenile justice committee a number of years ago, and he had always been hard on crime, hard on crime, hard on crime. And all of a sudden one year he came and he was open to everything that the Black Caucus brought to him about juvenile justice, and we're like, well, what happened? Well, what happened was his daughter had gotten into some trouble. He and his wife were now responsible for taking care of their grandson, who has been impacted by the missteps of his mother, and he was making bad decisions, and he got arrested. And once he got arrested, Granddaddy said he deserves a second chance. Well, all of a sudden, because it was impacting he and his family, young people deserve a second chance. Just take and put yourself in the place of one of those families. And just know that if it were your child, your grandchild, you would want someone to give them a second chance. Thank you so much for having me.